So today we're going to be reviewing the Meike 35 1.7 lens compared to the famous, well actually this is the newer Nikkor 51.8, but we're going to be comparing it to the older 51.8D and this newer 51.8G. So we've got a new lens chart here we're going to be using, and this is going to be something that I'm going to use to create the lens sensor specific LUTs. That you can check that idea out on my website, silverlightphotoco.com, and look for the LUTs section. But what we're doing today is we're comparing this Meike, I think that's how you say it, Meike? M-E-I-K-E, I think? Meike? And my reason for reviewing a 35mm focal length compared to a 50mm focal length is because, let's talk about that. It's because of this formula I have for using micro four thirds with a focal reducer. So as you can see here on the screen, you'll see the equivalent focal length for a 35mm on micro four thirds. So the biggest thing is that my favorite lens on micro four thirds for the tight shot is 35, or that 50 with a 0.71 focal reduction, which brings it down to that 35. And my philosophy is all based on my number one tip, which is always shoot with two cameras, or at least two cameras. So when you think that way of always shooting with two cameras, it takes away a little bit of that feeling like I've got to find one lens that does everything. And a lot of the time, I think that's really what happens when we're trying to decide what lens is our favorite lens. I can never answer that question anymore, because when I do it, it's always two lenses. There's always one for the wide and one for the tight. And my favorite combination is to shoot the tight shot at 35mm equivalent on micro four thirds, just straight 50 on APS-C, and then on full frame put the 1.4 teleconverter, and you pretty much have the same focal length all the way through. But today what we're talking about is this lens. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace this shot you're looking at right now, which is the Nikkor 51.8D, which is my favorite vintage lens, generally speaking. And it's on a 0.71 Viltrox focal reducer, Nikon mount, of course. So we're going to take the lens off there, and suppose we have to open this thing up. So this is the unofficial unboxing here. You know, I don't really like unboxing videos. I don't know about you, but I've never felt like they were worth my time. Lens cloth, that's pretty cool. So because it's a manual aperture, you kind of need a little bit of forgiveness here for the exposure. Now, why is it so much tighter of a crop? This is supposed to be 35mm focal length. So it's kind of a mystery to me. I'm kind of have to squish down here. It's kind of a mystery to me why this composition is so much tighter when this is supposed to be the same focal length. This is supposed to be, doing my math correctly? I'm trying to think here if I got my math correct. I mean 0.71 times, yeah, I think it's correct. Huh. Strange. So, well, let's just go to the color chart here, this thing, and try to get a direct comparison that way. This is really weird. I don't quite understand why the math isn't working out for the focal length. Should be almost the same, huh? Okay. Well, it's really puzzling. I think I'm going to do a bit more research. I'll leave some comments in the notes if you look in the description what I figured out about this. But I thought, according to my calculations, that the focal reducer plus a 50 millimeter was about a 35 millimeter with a 0.71 focal reduction. So I don't quite understand why the composition of this 50 on the focal reducer, just like what you're seeing with the older Nikon, why doesn't it equal a 35 prime lens? Could it just be my mistake? So take a look at the description for my conclusion on that. But those color charts, those were pretty interesting. There's a bit of variance because my hand was kind of a little bit unsteady and my focus was manual. So, but look at, compared to the other two lenses, I think this lens is actually more contrasty than the Nikon, either Nikon on the focal reducer, which is a good point for the focal reducer because I actually like the fact that it reduces the contrast on the Panasonic GX85 sensor because it's typically got a problem with too much contrast. So that's a subject for another day, but just a sneak peek is because of the anti-aliasing filter has been removed on the GX85 and most Panasonic cameras going beyond that for Micro Four Thirds anyway, the lower contrast of certain lenses actually helps. And so when I use the focal reducer in conjunction with a very contrasty lens, such as this Nikon 51.8G, it really helps. Just a trick I like to do, but when we've got a lens like this that we're shooting straight with no focal reducer, you have to deal with where the contrast is natively on this lens. But overall, this lens is pretty interesting. I'd be interested to test this in some more real life situations, not just a color chart like you see here, but let's give this a test in different scenarios and hopefully I'll have some reports from that as well.